Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. You look so beautiful in your purple backdrops, and oh my gosh, you are so beautiful today. We're going to go ahead and start our program. So again, good afternoon and welcome to this Domestic Violence Awareness Month program presented by LEJIM Incorporated. I'd like to first greet all of my GYM sisters, my National Board of Directors members, chapter presidents and representatives, our past national presidents who are with us today, our distinguished guest speakers, and as always, you all, our friends and family, and distinguished members of the community. Welcome to our first initial event for domestic violence awareness. I am Constance Davis, the 18th National President and current President of LEJIM Incorporated. You will hear more about our organization as we move forward. I'd also like to let you know that we are ready to stop domestic violence. Are you? We are ready to break this cycle. Are you? We're ready to stop all domestic violence, break the cycle, and learn more about healthy relationships. Are you? That's what you'll learn today. Are you ready to have healthy relationships? We have a great panel for you today, and I'd first like to introduce to you our moderator. Her name is Shanae McGee. She is an active member of LEJIM Incorporated. In 2014, she joined LEJIM as a charter member of the Capital Metro Area Chapter in Maryland. She also, as a member of the Capital Metro Area Chapter, affectionately known as CMAC, has served as treasurer, financial secretary, membership committee chairperson, and she's currently the chapter president. On a national level, she has served as an assistant secretary and the past vice president of our national programs, a national office. Shanae McGee is an active member of the community. She has served as a leader in several capacities. Currently, she is the founder and CEO of the NIA Foundation Incorporated, a nonprofit organization that serves survivors of domestic violence in Prince George's County, Maryland. The foundation's priority is to assist survivors and their families who need emergency housing and services. Our purpose, the NIA Foundation's purpose, is to educate the community by providing information and resources while raising awareness to ultimately stop domestic violence. Shanae has received several awards for her accomplishments within the community, and she continues to strive to make an impact to stop domestic violence through the NIA Foundation. Today, she is leading us as the chairperson of the National Domestic Violence Awareness Program. Without further ado, please meet our own Shanae McGee. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim Connie. Again, welcome. I want to give you a little information about the LEJIM's organization. LEJIM's Incorporated was founded in September 1955 in Norfolk, Virginia, and incorporated in April of 1968 in the state of Virginia. And we operate as a nonprofit tax corporation under 501c3 in the Internal Revenue Service IRS code. The GEMS Incorporated is organized exclusively for charitable, educational, civic, cultural purposes, and is committed to promoting positive influences within local communities. The GEMS Incorporated has chapters located across the United States. Let me say that again. The GEMS Incorporated has chapters located across the United States. Our chapters carry out its program, the DREAM initiative of activities based on mandates set forth by the national president and the National Board of Directors. Our goal is to raise awareness for victims and family members and train youth and adults on healthy relationships in order to prevent domestic violence, and your participation will help achieve our goal to raise awareness, educate our communities, and provide resources that will support efforts to break the cycle of domestic violence. The theme for domestic violence is too many to be silent. Domestic violence can happen to any one of us, race, age, sexual orientation, religion, or gender, and affects people of all social economic backgrounds and education levels. Domestic abuse is typically manifested as a pattern of abusive behavior toward an intimate partner in a dating or family relationship where the abuser exerts power and control over the victim. The abuse can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, psychological actions, or threats of actions that influence other persons. So further ado, you'll hear more information about how to stop the cycle of domestic violence. Again, we have a great program set before you today, and we'll get started. Before we move forward, we'll have prayer by our very own Denise Mackey Smith.
Let us bow our heads. I affirm divine order and expect the best. Let all of thoughts and concerns fall away as we approach our Father for humble guidance, for governance in this wonderful gathering of individuals. We pray that all of the individuals who have to present the butterflies will fall away, Father, because we know the information that they are providing is so valuable, so needed, and so timely. We approach you, Father, because we know that you order our steps, and it's only through you that the true falling away from this terrible infliction will come to pass. So as we go through the evening, we pray that our hearts be settled, that our minds be clear, and that we open ourselves up to gaining knowledge and understanding. We pray all these things in the name of your Son, Christ Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jim Denise. Now we have welcoming by Shannon McMillan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everybody is doing well. I welcome you to the Domestic Violence Awareness virtual event. I hope everyone here is ready to listen and to be engaged. This is such an important thing for us to do this event. I really hope that we're able to take the information that we hear today and use it to help somebody in our lives, help somebody we don't know, being able to take this information and just spread it all around so we can dispel this horrible thing that people go through. And it's very near and dear and close to my heart. And I just hope you enjoy all of our wonderful speakers today. We have Ms. Dominique Lamb, who's the founder of We Teach Love. We have Ms. Faye Mann, who is a wonderful author. And we also have Dr. Denise McCain, who is the director of the Prince George's County Family Justice Center. So we hope your ears are open, your hearts are open, and you're ready to engage and just get all the information we need so we can help a loved one or someone who is close to us. Enjoy.
Thank you, Shannon. Now we'll hear from Dominique Lamb. Dominique Lamb founded We Teach Love, a nonprofit organization that teaches healthy relationships to combat interpersonal violence and abuse. In 2016, Dominique wrote and self-published What Happens in This House, detailing her journey from experiencing domestic violence and abuse to learning, teaching others about healthy relationships. She has since developed and co-taught a healthy relationships course at George Mason University. She is currently working to expand We Teach Love's mission internationally by training Uganda women on the We Teach Love curriculum so that they can teach in schools, a goal she has also has for schools in the US. In addition to this very important work, Dominique is a licensed real estate broker and owner of the Haven Firm LLC, serving Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, and Georgia. Dominique earned a bachelor's degree from Washington and Lee University in politics and philosophy, and 2 graduate degrees, philosophy with a concentration in professional ethics from George Mason University and digital media, digitalization and intellectual property from the University of Maryland, University College. Dominique is a native of the DC metro area and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, Inc. Now, further ado, Ms. Dominique Lamb.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for inviting me to speak. This is a topic that personally is very resonant for me. So I'll share what wasn't in my bio, is that I grew up witnessing and experiencing domestic violence, and then entered into my own relationship that turned out to be abusive as a young adult. And so from that time, I would say actually while I was studying at George Mason for my master's degree, I started working with nonprofit organizations on domestic violence. And when I started working with them, I still didn't understand that I had been a survivor of domestic violence because of the way that we talk about abuse, or don't talk about it rather. I thought what I experienced was something secret and something that shouldn't have happened, but not necessarily domestic violence. So as I started to learn about it from working with the nonprofit organizations I was working with, that actually were sending me out to teach about domestic violence and dating abuse on college campuses, then I realized that I was included in the population that I was talking about, and that my experiences were abusive and unhealthy experiences. So that sort of ignited my interest in continuing this work, and kind of brings you up to where my bio picks up in terms of starting the organization and writing the book. So some of the reason that I do healthy relationships work is because oftentimes when we're talking about unhealthy relationships, we're talking about abuse or just domestic violence awareness, we're focusing on what not to do. We're focusing on the red flags. I'm sure everybody's heard about the red flags to avoid. We're focusing on physical violence, and we're talking about someone hitting you, or what for me growing up, what comes to mind is the movie What's Love Got to Do with It, and Tina Turner. And we're always thinking of the violent aspect of abuse. But often, and maybe you've heard this, nobody gets slapped on their first date. Often there are a lot of abusive behaviors and unhealthy behaviors that precede any violence. So that's kind of where my interest in working on healthy relationships has come, because it's really difficult to prevent or eliminate abuse when the focus is on what not to do. So I like to compare it to if I were telling you all how to get to my house and I only told you what not to do. If I only said, don't turn left, don't get on the highway, if every direction I gave you was what not to do, you'd be looking at me like, what am I supposed to do? How do I get to your house? So my work really is in demystifying what am I supposed to be doing instead. I know that I'm not supposed to be hit. I know that I'm not supposed to, or maybe I know that I'm not supposed to have these certain unhealthy behaviors, but what is it supposed to look like? So that's really what I want to focus on today, because I think we spend a lot of time and resources and energy on helping people who are already in the situation. And that's extremely important, but it's also reactive. It's also like we're waiting for you to get into that situation and then we can help you, right? Like we have really important resources like hotlines and shelters and all those things for situations where it's like, okay, once you're there, you just need resources and help. But what do we do for young people who maybe are just starting out in terms of their relationships? They're still learning how to develop their relationships. What are we doing to prevent them from ever needing to go to a shelter or call a hotline? So that's what I want to focus on, which is slightly different than domestic violence awareness. It's healthy relationships awareness. But it's really important to this field in this industry. So as Shanae mentioned, I wrote a book called What Happens in This House. And that came from my mom saying, what happens in this house stays in this house. Because what was happening in our house should not have been happening. And in that book, I do detail my experience with it, both as a child and as a young adult. But then I start to go into what's necessary for healthy relationships. And so some of the factors I want to share with you, I should say not some, all, are factors you can apply to any relationship, whether that's with a child, with a parent, with a friend, with a coworker, or, a romantic relationship. So I'll start by saying the first thing that's important is developing a self relationship. I think most of the time we neglect to even understand that we have a relationship with ourselves, right? A lot of us haven't even done any self-work to see, like, how do I talk to myself? How do I treat myself? I think it's becoming more popular now, like the term self-care and self-love. And, sometimes those can be a little cliche because we're thinking, well, self-love is me having a bubble bath and a glass of wine, but it's more than that. It's really understanding the relationship you have to yourself and doing that self-work. So that may look like therapy, as a way to develop that relationship. That may look like examining the way that you talk to yourself. Do you put yourself down? Are you used to doubting yourself? Are you used to, maybe on the flip side, being really confident in yourself? So really examining that self-relationship. I think that's where we get that saying that you can't love someone else before you love yourself. It really is that deep. I think even if you want to take it biblical, the scripture and the part that I think is always kind of left out is love your neighbor as yourself, right? Which means you got to love yourself first, and then you can love your neighbor. But I think we just hear love your neighbor and cut it. So really that self-relationship is critical in developing that relationship and making sure that it's healthy, making sure that you're talking to yourself in a healthy way, treating yourself in a healthy way. I think one of a really good, quick way to kind of measure your relationship is to think about a good friend. Think about somebody that you really love and respect. And the way that you talk to that friend, is that how you talk to yourself? Because if it's not, then the way that you're talking to yourself is probably unhealthy. So I want to start there. Self-relationship is critical. One, understanding that you have one, and then two, making sure that it's a healthy one. because from there, you'll be able to understand better that somebody else should have a healthy relationship with themselves if they're going to be in relationship with you. And so what you'll find is if you have a healthy self relationship, but the person that you're interacting with doesn't, you'll see how maybe they lack boundaries, or maybe they're not able to be vulnerable with you, or they're not able to extend you compassion or grace, right? When you would extend that to yourself. And that's because they haven't done that work for themselves yet. And that's just something that we don't really emphasize in our community, in our society enough. So that's the first thing. And then in my book, I detail 5 factors. So if anybody's taking notes, there's 5 factors for a healthy relationship. And again, these apply to all relationships. So the first, of course, is communication. I think everybody can agree that communication is critical to a healthy relationship. But I think where we miss things is it's not just communication. It's honest communication. It's forthcoming communication. It's open communication. It's making sure that there's understanding of what we're saying. It's not, just communication. And then I think as you develop a relationship with someone, you'll notice that effective communication, you almost start to have your own language with them, or maybe your own dialect of language with them. So something that I say to my good girlfriend, I could say the same word to my good girlfriend and say that word to my mom, and it'll mean totally different things to them, because our relationship, the context of it informs what I'm saying. So that, I think, is just another sign of good communication between two people, effective communication. So I don't want to just say communication. All of those other elements I mentioned are important for it to be effective and helpful to a healthy relationship. So that's the first point. The second factor you need for a healthy relationship is safety and respect. So break those down. Safety, one, and they build on each other. So we're communicating about what makes us feel safe or unsafe. Has anybody ever done that? Has anybody ever communicated that? Just if you have, just raise your hand with your reactions. Yeah, it's rare, but it's really important to communicate what makes you feel safe or unsafe. Imagine if you were like riding in a car with a friend and they were driving over 100 miles per hour. Would you say, I don't feel safe right now? You're driving too fast, I don't feel safe. That's a really critical, important part of a healthy relationship. And to harken back to what I said before, you can't communicate that if you don't know what makes you feel safe or unsafe, right? Like you can't tell another person that this is what I need to feel safe if you haven't done that work. And that work is ongoing. So you will find new things, right? You'll change and grow, and new things will come up that you'll have to communicate. So this work is going to be iterative, where you're going to have to go back and do more communicating. But to start, you do have to ask yourself these questions, like, what are my boundaries so that I can communicate them to another person? And then there's respect, right? So what do I find respectful or disrespectful? In my book, I talk about a relationship that I had with a person. It was my first healthy relationship. And from the very beginning, he volunteered his pet peeves to me. He volunteered to tell me what they were. And he also told me what his deal breakers were. And this is new for me to experience. I was really having to adjust to having those kind of conversations, but also was helpful because there was no guesswork. I knew what would be tolerated and what wouldn't. And I knew on the flip side, how to make him feel respected, instead of feeling disrespected. So something that was common or normal for me in my unhealthy relationship was hanging up on each other, like, you know, fussing, going back and forth, and then hang up the phone. And in my healthy relationship, that was one of the things that he said was a deal breaker for him. He's like, I don't do that where we hang up on each other. And so I found myself kind of, because I thought it was normal at the time, making the case that like, well, when you're really upset, you know, you're arguing, sometimes you may hang up. And he was like, no, that's not, for him, that's a total deal breaker. So it became a moment for me to grow and understand that. And of course, now that's how I feel. I agree. But you see how easily you can normalize some abusive behavior and almost make the case to continue doing it. So that's safety and respect. And they both, of course, need to be communicated in order to have a healthy relationship. And then third factor is trust. So with trust, what I like to say is you can't trust somebody that you don't respect or that doesn't respect you. Can't trust someone you don't feel safe with. You can't trust someone you don't even feel safe enough to communicate with. We say that we trust people, right? Because it sounds good and maybe we have parts that want to please other people. So we'll say that we trust them. But if you haven't had certain conversations, you can't say you trust them. Not what we all universally accept as trust. So trust is really important because of the factors that come before it. But then also trust includes, do I believe that this person has been honest with me and will be honest with me? Can I give them the benefit of the doubt when I don't have all the information, right? And I think, like I said, those other factors build you up to that point. So if those things haven't happened and they haven't happened effectively, can't get to trust, which is, again, why these are in a specific order. So that's the third one, trust. And then the fourth one is balance. So balance, I approach in two different ways. Balance has two interpretations. So one of them is we're all in relationships, right? We have, Lejeune have relationships with each other. You all have relationships within your organization. And then you all have your significant other or spouse or friends or children. And then you have maybe work friends. Like you have lots of different relationships. Balance means that you don't spend all your time and energy on any one of those relationships. You have balance. They balance each other out, right? And you go to this person for, to share something you're really excited about, and you go to this person for advice, right? Or you go to this person because you love going out to brunch. Like I love going to brunch. That's your brunch buddy, right? But then you still go spend time with your mom. So balance is really important. And, again, one of the red flags that we often hear about is when you don't have that balance in a relationship, when you are spending too much time with this person, when you've isolated yourself or been isolated from your family and friends, right? That's not balance. So that's one interpretation of it. The other one, maybe you could swap out and say equality. I still think it's balance, but you could also say equality, and that's within that relationship, right? And again, these apply to all of your relationships, but in the romantic context, that looks like discussing, communicating about what you each bring to that relationship, right? Like what makes you both feel respected and treated as an equal partner in that relationship. And I should say, really, I guess there's a third way to interpret this. Balance isn't equal all the time, right? There are times that one person has to pick up the slack for the other. And typically, if the relationship is long enough, that will happen. You'll volley back and forth. So like for me, I recently had minor surgery and couldn't really walk around well. So I had some friends who all like chipped in to help me. I have a dog, so they walked my dog for me. They went and got me food. And we could say hypothetically, if that happened to them, I would step up and do more for them than they, would be doing. So we wouldn't have that equality in the moment, but we'd still have balance, if that makes sense. So in a romantic context, we talk about, bills and housework that needs to be done, and making decisions together and finding balance in all of the things that come up in that relationship, right? Or with a friend, like you're not making all the decisions, you're making decisions together about where you want to go to dinner tonight, or where to go on a girls' trip, that kind of thing. So that's the fourth factor, is balance. And then the fifth and final factor is intimacy. And I like to say intimacy also includes sacred time or quality time, because again, these apply to all relationships. So I know for most of us, when we hear intimacy, we think of a romantic context and we think of something like physical, like sexual, but intimacy is not necessarily that. It's connectedness, it's closeness, right? It depends on the context. So it helps people to think of it as quality time or sacred time. So one of my favorite examples of intimacy is President Obama shared years ago that he and his oldest daughter, Malia, I think she's the oldest. Yeah, Malia would read Harry Potter books together. So one of the things about intimacy is that it's unique to that relationship. He didn't read Harry Potter books with Michelle or Sasha. That was his thing with Malia. And that was something specific to their relationship. So that can take on different looks depending on the relationship. Of course, again, it's really easy to think about the romantic context, and how that may look like holding hands or dating or kissing, or, like whatever that looks like. But again, I say, if you don't have trust and balance and respect and all these other pieces, it's really difficult to have healthy intimacy. You, of course, can have intimacy before you've established the 4 factors I talked about. But healthy intimacy has the foundation of healthy communication, safety and respect, trust, balance. All of those things are in place before you have healthy intimacy. So that kind of covers, in general, what healthy relationships look like. I don't want to go over my time. I don't even know how close I am to my time. So I was trying to breeze through without rushing. But that's kind of high level of what I wanted to share, just about one, developing again that healthy self relationship, and using those factors, even like, do I spend time alone with myself? Like, how am I talking to myself? What am I doing to ensure that I feel safe, right? How am I advocating for myself and feeling respected? And, how am I balancing? That's something I have trouble with. If you're a workaholic or somebody who, is always exerting your energy outward, how much of that are you giving to yourself and taking care of yourself and what you need? So developing that self relationship is critical. And then using these 5 factors to develop your relationships externally with other people. So thank you all. We're doing a Q&A, I think. So if
Yeah.
any questions, we'll do them then.
Yeah, we're going to wait to the end. But Dominique, thank you so much. I have been taking notes. I'm pretty sure I'll be using this. And now I'm working on self-care, but self-relationship is even better. So yeah, we will have some questions at the end. So thank you so much. Those were some great nuggets. We appreciate you. Okay. All right, next on the agenda, I want to welcome Ms. Faye Mann, who's a published author, freelance writer, reporter, motivational speaker, small business consultant, real estate developer, and a youth development specialist. Faye has spent over 30 years advocating for children, youth, and women. In 2015, she published her first book, which details her personal experience with domestic violence. The book can be used as a platform to address healthy relationships and safe dating for teens. As a youth development specialist, Faith has managed and monitored student services grants that have benefited several rural Georgia counties. She has served on a local Head Start Policy Council, a steering committee of a Future Boys and Girls Club unit, and the advisory board of the Albany State University Social Work Department. Now she serves on a community preservation board for a nonprofit organization, the board of a battered women's shelter, the board of a local Department of Family and Children's Services office, and the board of a regional behavioral health committee, currently serving as chair. Dave, we want to thank you for being with us today. Dave Mann.
Thank you, everyone. Dominic, before I continue, I am just totally impressed with your approach to healthy relationships, and I cannot wait for us to talk.
Yes, that's definitely tough.
Networking is so very key, so very key.
Mhm.
So it's an opportunity that the president and I have been trying to get together on for a while to talk about domestic violence. And this forum, this panel is phenomenal. Just to know that there are other women who have the heart and passion to speak out against something that is such a taboo subject. We can no longer be silent. For 20 years, before I actually published my book called Home, the New Prison. And could we show the cover of the book? This book, this illustration on the cover vividly describes how I felt being in prison. Literally, if you look to the left, it was as if I were in chains. And when people saw the cover, they thought it was about slavery. Well, in essence, that was my life. I was in prison to someone who was supposed to love me, protect me, and cherish me, to someone who I was supposed to respect as a husband. And I tried. But when you're in prison and you're being mistreated, how do you do that? Just how do you do that? So when I wrote this book in 2015, and we're going to talk about the book just for a moment, but this isn't really just about the book, because if I never sell a book, that's not my concern. My concern is to break the silence, to share this information so that no other woman will have to endure. And it's about being forewarned before you even get into the relationship, as Dominic mentioned. It's not just about helping someone to get out, but to keep them from getting in that kind of relationship. So when I was thinking about putting this book together, literally all I could think about was being in prison. But I thought about some other things that comes along with the prison system, how someone becomes a convict, how someone gets to that point. But normally, someone in prison has committed a crime. But I internalized this. I had to think of it. I am in this prison, but how did I get here? So I had to relate being in prison to being in my home, being in prison. So would you please display the table of contents so you can at least see how it came to you and how it came about in my mind? In chapter 1, I talk about love's entrapment. Oh boy, he was the most chivalrous guy. most wonderful man. He came to see me every weekend except one during the period of 6 months. The only time he didn't come to see me is when I went to meet his family. It was a 4-hour drive round trip every weekend for him to come see me. Oh boy, this man must really love me. He's here to see me every weekend. No. As Dominic mentioned, there's this thing called control. Oh, that was control. It was a little sign that I did not notice. It was so subtle. I did not notice the sign. So then in chapter 2, the indictment, the sentencing. Marriage? Do you think of marriage as an indictment, as a sentence? Well, in my case, in the case of many others, oh yeah, definitely. Then chapter 3, once you sign that dotted line and your name becomes his name, your last name becomes his last name, the cuffs drawn, the imprisonment began. I stayed there for nearly 6 years. I was in prison. But I had to figure out by chapter 4 how to escape. My prison release was in front of me. How would I escape? Well, my escape had to be disguised. It couldn't just be that I get my bag and I walk out the door. That's not happening. And it doesn't happen for most women. So number 5, chapter 5 was the crime. Those missed warning signs. That was my crime. No, I'm not taking the blame for what someone else did to me. Absolutely not. I didn't beat me. I didn't curse me out. I didn't belittle me. I didn't control me. But we have to be aware of the signs. They're there. They might be subtle, but we have to be mindful. Chapter 6, my parole, life after death. You see, when I was married to him, it was as if I died inside, but then I became alive again. When I start to regain my confidence, my dignity was restored. This was such an emotional impact on my life. If you notice, I have chapter 6A and 6B. Mentally, I could not write chapter 7 and 8 because I could not move beyond the fact that I was in this marriage almost 6 years. I didn't even want to think about what chapter 7 and 8 would be. So I called it 6A and 6B. 6A is raising awareness after a death sentence. And 6B is resources. Knowledge is power. So this is how all of this came into view. And it was such a heart-wrenching experience for me. I lived this for 6 years. I carried this around inside of me for 20 years. I literally wrote this book in 2 weeks. Typed it up, self-published and everything from start to finish in 2 weeks. And people are like, why? How did you do that? When you have something inside of you like that, it only takes a while. When you start writing, it just flows. I could have written a novel, but I wasn't trying to write something that was going to be long and drawn out. I wanted something that someone could pick up and read in 45 minutes to an hour. Let's just say, you know, someone at work who's being abused. And you know she's being abused. She cannot take this book home. Because if her husband or boyfriend or abuser sees it, that's going to add fuel to the fire. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work in her best interest. So what is she going to need to do? You slide that book to her and say, hey, Sally, you might want to read this on your lunch break. It gives Sally some knowledge. It arms her with information and awareness of how to get out. It lets her know she's not alone, that someone else went through this. And that's the key of breaking the silence. Knowing that one too many is one too many. If you would show the back of the book cover, please. These were some of the warning signs. I'm not quite sure if I can read that one. Let me pull it up on my phone here. Bear with me just a moment. So some of the questions, the warning signs that I've missed. Do you have the freedom to visit with family and friends without being accompanied by your spouse or partner? Is he like I hate to say this, like a dog on a leash? He has to follow you around everywhere you go. Might not be healthy. Are you belittled about things for which you should receive praise? Oh, yes. I went to school, a technical college first, to become a secretary. And so I was trained. And when we got married, I had to go to a temporary service because I was new in the area. So I scored extremely high on everything. And the person who administered the test said, "Oh, you scored higher than anybody. Yes, we'll be able to place you." So I was going to be placed the next day. So I came home really excited. You know, who wouldn't want their wife to go get a job? You're newly married. You don't want all the responsibility yourself. He shoots me down. "Oh, you're not that smart. My sister did that and she didn't go to school." That was the first thing that happened. And I'm like, wow, he can't just be happy for me. But I didn't leave then, of course. I just kind of brushed it off. Another question: is your interaction with the opposite sex completely forbidden in every setting, including the workplace? Do you get accused of every man that you encounter? Not a healthy relationship. Does your spouse or partner threaten you with physical violence? Not necessarily hitting or beating you, but makes threats. You know, terroristic threats and acts is something that people get in trouble with when they do it against other people. But oftentimes when they do it against their mate, it's not readily recognized yet until some harm is done, until there's some physical evidence. But you do it out there to someone on the street, it's a problem. You have to be aware. Is everything about your life with your spouse or partner top secret? I mean, you can't tell your best girlfriend, your mom, your sister, anything? That's a problem. Does your spouse or partner play mind games, causing you to think that you can do nothing right? Everything is your fault. I remember one occasion, I called in a sandwiches for the two of us at this sub shop. He heard me word for word exactly what I asked for. Picked up the sandwiches. His was not right. Who got the punches? Getting punched because the sandwich was made wrong by someone else. Who does that? The Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde that I was married to. When you are in the company of family and friends, does your partner, spouse dominate the conversation you initiate? Just completely takes over. And you know why that happens sometimes? Because he fears that you're going to say something that people will pick up on. So he wants to control the conversation. Might be something you should be aware of. Those were subtle things that I just did not pick up on. I wasn't expecting to marry a man who was abusive. I was reared in a different kind of household. He was too, that I thought. So who would know? Who would know? The point of this is I lived in this prison for nearly 6 years. And the night that I left, I was beaten with a slotted spoon, a spatula, and a wire mesh strainer that was this big, right? But by the time he was finished with me, the mesh was gone and the strainer looked like an oblong knife. After he finished his episode, we sat down. I had baked some Stouffer's lasagna because he wanted some. I fixed his plate. He wanted me to sit down right beside him. I did. And then he proceeds to ask me, where do you want to go tomorrow? It was Friday night. He wants to know where I want to go Saturday for dinner, as if nothing happened, completely oblivious to what he had done to me. He had been drinking. No excuse though, because he wasn't drinking most of the time. But alcohol and drugs will make the situation worse, but that was not his problem, not at all. It was a learned behavior. He had learned it from somewhere else. He went to sleep. He had locked my keys in the briefcase, his briefcase. And I knew I had to get out. That was my opportunity to leave. I was fearful though. And I'm not one who wants to destroy someone else's property, but I had to pry open his briefcase with a knife. I will tell you this. I did get the only knife in the house and go into the bedroom. But between standing in the bedroom and coming out of the bedroom, it's kind of a blur. But all I can say is I do believe God kept me from stabbing him and committing a crime of passion where every stab would have been, you remember this, remember that. And I'm glad it did not happen. Because I can tell you, I'm an honest person. And if the judge had asked me or attorney had asked me, so when you were stabbing your husband, and I did not kill my husband, when you were stabbing your husband, I didn't even stab him, but when you were stabbing your husband, if this had been the case, did you think about what you were doing? I would have said yes, if it had been the case. My attorney would have probably told me, you got to pretend that you're crazy, you lost your mind, you snapped. No, I knew exactly that's what I would have said. So I probably would have gone to prison for premeditated murder. Okay. So I'm so thankful that I walked away. And I thank God for doing that because I know it would have been bloody murder. So the best thing for me to do, I left, but I was still protecting him. I went to his parents' house. I didn't even call the authorities. And to this day, I'm scared to have knives in my house. I hide my knives underneath something so that I can't readily see them. Because just the thought, the last utensil in the kitchen that he could have picked up would have been the knife to use it on me. Fearful I was. I don't want anyone to ever have to go through what I went through. So that's why I speak out. And I'm very vocal. I had one person tell me, man, you're going to have a hard time finding you a man because he's afraid you're going to write a book about him. Well, guess what? I don't need that man in my life. If he's that worried, because maybe he's guilty of something. Maybe he's an undercover abuser. He's fearful. I don't need that in my life. So my passion for writing was fueled by the pain. So I wrote the book. But prior to that, I started writing some poetry. And I do have 2 short pieces that I would like to read. One of them I published in the book. And I actually wrote it about my first husband. And I just have to say this, I was married again, but the second husband and I did not work out. He and I did not work out. Sorry, I put my timer on. Did not work out. But he and I are still very good friends. But this poem was written about my first husband and how I felt like a doormat. Life without you. Because this is how a lot of women feel. We don't want to be without our mates, without our partners. And we got together for a reason. But this is called life without you. Life without you makes hard the living. Lessons of love lost and no more giving. I feel a very subtle and deep void inside. The pain, frustration, torture, near death does not subside. What would I give to have and hold you again? Well, the answer to that question lies locked deep within. A heart that is crushed, nowhere near mended. My entire existence and being has been suspended. Suspended as it is dangling, hanging in midair. Dare I ever mention the source of my despair? No, I'm not a doormat or a puppet on a string. Just a woman wanting love, needing love, and all those things. So this is how I describe my life without you. And it was painful. I cried myself to sleep Many a nights after I decided to leave, I went into therapy for a year. And when I initially went into therapy, I was still trying to protect him, would not mention his name, because I was still trying to protect him when he failed to protect me from himself. We can't do that. We cannot allow ourselves to be hurt by people who will not love us the way we need to be loved. Now, this one is entitled Till Death Do Us Part. Death isn't always a physical demise. It's not always falling asleep. My love for you is real. It was based on the right things. I did not need you for money. I can make my own. I did not need you for a house or a car or other material things. I was buying those things before you came along. I did not need you to make me look good. That was something I could do and was always understood. I did not need you to make me feel complete. That was something I could do and never feel defeat. All I ever wanted from you was you. But it seems as though that was the last thing you would do. You were not going to give of yourself. You were too busy giving it to everyone else. I'm not talking just about your sex, but for me, about the time spent that you would vex. Now that we're going to go our separate way, there's one final thing I must say. I love you until death did us part. Death came when you broke my heart. So we lose ourselves in people who are abusive. We have to find ourselves again. I don't call myself a victim. I call myself a victor because I overcame. I don't brag about anything that I've done, but my resume shows that I didn't become this little mousy person, crouched down, didn't move forward, because all of those things that they named that I'm doing, I have done, came after I got out of an abusive marriage. So there's life after death. You can move forward. You can get out. And listen to other people's stories about what happened to them can be a motivation for you not to even have to deal with it. And a couple of pointers, and I will be quick. You want to get away. Even if you decide to go back to him, that's your choice. Get out. Let him know you mean business and you're not going to take this. Maybe he'll see the need to go to counseling. Maybe he won't, but you'll get out with your life. And since the pandemic, so many women have lost their lives, and men too. Men can be abused. No need. Once you leave, you have to go incognito. Don't use the same credit cards because he probably has access. Don't use the same telephone number because he probably has access to your account. Oh, and for heaven forbids you tell some family and friends who are cool with both of you, who think, oh, you know, I know he can't be doing that to her. Be mindful. They talk too, and they can put you in danger. You must be careful. And you always want to notify the authorities, because if you don't, and you don't have a trail that shows what has happened, the authorities might not believe you. And if you have kids, you're just perpetuating a cycle of abuse by allowing your kids to see what you're going through. Get out. Get out. You have to have a plan. Yes, you have to have a plan. And your plan has to be well thought out. You cannot just jump up and leave in the midst of it because you might die. So I could speak forever. I could talk and go on for days and days and days, but I have to be respectful of my time. But I beg of any woman, and it starts as early as, I hate to say it, elementary school. You got to be careful. We have to teach our girls how to teach men how to respect them, because if we don't, this vicious cycle will continue. Thanks for letting you into my world, my past world of home, the new prison.
Wow, Faye. I'm sorry, Miss Victor. Thank you, thank you for sharing your story with us today. And also thank you for the nuggets. I'm so thankful that you believed enough and had enough strength, and God showed up for you, and now you're showing up for others. So again, thank you so much for sharing. And please hang around with us because we will have Q&A afterwards as well. All right, we have one more speaker. I'm not going to tell you how near and dear she is to my heart. I'm just going to read her bio and you'll hear from her soon thereafter. Dr. Denise McCain is a foremost domestic violence expert, researcher, visionary leader, and trailblazer in the movement to break the cycle of intimate partner and gender-based violence. With more than 25 years of experience in the field, Dr. McCain has worked on the front lines as a grassroots advocate, a domestic violence program director, the government administrator of Federal Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, funded programs, and the Maryland State Coordinator of Victim Services for the Maryland Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention, where she served as a legislative liaison responsible for ensuring compliance and implementation of statutory crime victims' rights. Dr. McCain has also lent her voice to broadcast media as the co-host of The Silent Storm, the first national domestic violence radio talk show that aired on WHUR World and Sirius XM Channel 121. In June 2016, Dr. McCain was appointed as the director of the Prince George's County Family Justice Center, an initiative of the Circuit Court. This multidisciplinary, multi-agency organization provides comprehensive services to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and elderly abuse within the support of 22 co-located local government and nonprofit agencies. In May of 2019, Dr. McCain was nominated and confirmed by the Prince George's County Council as a commissioner of the Prince George's County Commission for Women, where she currently serves as the chair. Now, further ado, Ms. Dr. McCain. She's trying to unmute. Tech team, can we unmute?
Am I there?
There you are.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. And thank you, Shanae, for not reading any more of that bio. I was hoping you would have cut it down. That would have taken up more than half of my time. But thank you again to Les Gems. I appreciate so much the opportunity to be with you, as well as the fact that you're taking time to discuss this very important issue. While it is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, this is a subject that we have to continue to keep in the forefront. We have to continue to talk about, because we know that silence perpetuates the violence. So again, I applaud you for taking this on today, and for all of you that have joined. Just also a special shout out to my fellow presenters, my Sarah, Dominique. Thank you for those words. I'm also going to take note of that, as well as Faye, your bravery and courage for being here and doing what you do. I would also add, I think we all share something in common, which is never put in my bio, but I too have experienced domestic violence initially as a child. I grew up in a home where it was a standard everyday occurrence almost that, my mother suffered at the hands of my father. And if the laws were available back then, my father would have been imprisoned for life. because it was such a horrific time. So this and those experiences have really led me to where I am today doing this work. I see that, you know, for many people that get into this business, I don't know that anyone ever says, I want to go to school and I want to become a domestic violence advocate or write books about it. But generally, it's the experiences for those of us that really know what this is about and what it looks like that brings us here to do this very important work. So again, I thank you both for what you're doing. And, you know, we have to continue to keep the conversations going. So I want to start out and really, as I was asked, I want to talk a little bit more about the Family Justice Center and resources. For many people who unfortunately did not have an opportunity to learn about those 5 healthy, those tips for healthy relationships to be preventative, because we do know and understand that more often than not, individuals find themselves in these relationships because they did not know what to look for. They didn't understand that that charming gentleman was going to turn and become the Mr. Hyde from the Jekyll who he was when you first met him. And again, unfortunately, a lot of women do find themselves in what would be much like a prison, as you pointed out, Faye. But once you're there and, you know, you find yourself in that space and you don't know where to go, you don't know what to do, there are resources. And the Family Justice Center, located in Prince George's County, Upper Marlboro, is a model of what help should look like. This facility is actually something that was established in 2016. We are an initiative of the Circuit Court, and our goal is really to make the process much easier, more efficient, more holistic. We say more client-centered. If you can imagine a person, you know, such as yourself, Faye, or any woman who's been terrorized, who's been traumatized, living under terror, fear, perhaps having just been beaten, threatened with with knives, guns even, which we are finding now, many more cases are involving guns nowadays. What would you do? Where do you go? How do you even start the process? Unfortunately, it can be very complex. It can be a daunting experience, and you don't know where to go. The Family Justice Center is the best practice what every state, every jurisdiction should have, because basically what we do is make all of those resources available under one roof. We help survivors navigate the process, navigate the system to get the help that they need, without having to constantly tell that story over and over and over again. Because what we know is every time you go somewhere and the first thing they say is, how can we help you? Well, guess what? You're now going to have to start talking about what happened. You go somewhere else, you're going to have to tell that story again. And unfortunately, that can be re-traumatizing. So what we are doing is making it much easier for a person to get help one time, tell the story, and everything else is made available to you. As you pointed out, Faye, as well, the pandemic was a very difficult time for survivors who were literally trapped in their home. You know, when people were being told to shelter in place to stay safe, survivors unfortunately were forced to be at home, which was not a safe place for them. During that time period, in the very early stages of the pandemic, we did not see many people. Our numbers were very low. Our phones were not ringing. And that we realized is because their abusers were right there. They didn't have the space, the privacy to make those phone calls, to even get out, even though we weren't there either, but we were still available for phone take-ins. They were isolated. The stress levels were higher. Given everything that was going on, people were losing their jobs. You know, what a bad situation was made even worse during the pandemic. After we returned in 2022, late early 22, we opened our doors again. The phones were off the hook. We have seen a tremendous increase in the number of people that are currently seeking services, because we're doing this via a hybrid model, which we're calling virtual intake as well as walk-in. So it's making it much more efficient. What I want to point out right now is that we are seeing the standard. If you look at averages and norms, The average person who is coming in for services right now, believe it or not, are between the ages of 18 and 34. More in the 24 range, but I do statistics for the agency, and I can tell you it's a single woman of color between the ages of 18 and 24. Surprising, it was stated that we're seeing much younger survivors, individuals who are involved with abusive situations. That is the age range that is most prevalent. So I would ask that we focus and pay attention to younger women. What are we doing and how can we help them? Is it the healthy relationships that we need to help and get that information out? Because it is definitely the area. The need is largely legal assistance and counseling. Without that support of being able to get out of a situation, whether it be through a protective order, which by the way is just a piece of paper, you need to have a safety plan, you need to have other means of removing yourself from that situation, because a protective order in and of itself is not going to do it. If someone has intentions of harming you, by no means is a piece of paper going to prevent them from doing that. So you need to have, in addition to a protective order, a real concrete safety plan. And then mental health services have been very prevalent, the need for mental health services. There's also a factor that I've been paying a lot of attention to, and I think it's something that really warrants much more attention as well. I'm calling it the six-figure or the income factor is really what I'm calling it. We are finding right now that there's a misnomer that individuals who are involved or victims of domestic violence are poor, they're uneducated, they're live in rural and urban areas. Well, I want to tell you that that is not necessarily the case. We have begun to see a significant increase in women coming in for services or calling that are in the six-figure range. Surprising, but not. There's a great deal, and there continues to be a great deal of shame. There's the stigma. There's embarrassment around being in an abusive relationship. But now that we have made it anonymous such that you don't have to come into the building, that you can call, there are some things that we ask people. We want to know where they live. We have to make sure you're eligible, but we ask for income. We have had probably within the last 60 days, looking at some of the data, probably 10% of women are calling us that have incomes in the six-figure range. So what does that tell you? It tells you that we know that domestic violence has no face. It could be anyone, but I think there is something to look at with women who are of higher income that are now starting to reach out. And I think it's probably a positive thing, because it's telling me that they're willing to leave those situations, even though they're comfortable, even though they may face some embarrassment by having to admit that, they're still coming out to get help. And that's the most important thing. The other component of the income factor is that the overwhelming majority outside of that very small percent have zero to little income. And there's a tremendous need for resources to help women stabilize themselves economically. And that's really what I think the bottom line is for all of this. If you are unable to take care of yourself and you're in an abusive relationship, 9 times out of 10, you're going to stay there. Why? Because you aren't able to support yourself. And even if you're able to leave that relationship, you're going to find yourself back in another relationship because, again, you aren't stable. That's the area that I think we should also focus on. It's something I'm looking at in the Family Justice Center by bringing in a partner, an organization that can do more around helping career development, skills development, helping women get their GEDs or to go back to school, to do things that are going to help them be more independent, more self-sufficient, so that they are not financially dependent upon their abusers. Again, that's not the only factor, but again, if you look at this more holistically, as I do, and I'm trying to take away, looking at trends, that is a very common element, a common theme. And again, I would say probably 9 out of 10 are in a situation where they're unable to take care of themselves financially. So that it's a large contributing factor. Faye, you talked about protecting your abuser, even after, all the things that he had done to you, and the fact that you were almost going to be, or could have been, imprisoned for potential behaviors. Trauma bonding is what that's called. You were very much connected to your abuser, despite the fact that he was being abusive to you. We also see that a lot of women are connected to their partners, despite the fact that they're abusing them, which is why mental health counseling is necessary. I'm happy to hear that you were able to get counseling, because that is really probably one of the few things that will help you really move on, anyone move on. Lastly, what I'm just going to talk about very briefly, we know that domestic violence is not something that happens randomly. It happens at all times of the day, of night. Most cases do occur in after hours. Most organizations, even the Family Justice Center, has limited hours, 9 to 5, 8:30 to 5. We were able to get about $1 million from the federal government through the Office on Violence Against Women to really enhance and extend the hours of services that we're providing. So hopefully by the end of this month, end of October, we will begin to open our facility, or have it open from 8:30 a.m. to 8 o'clock on Thursdays until 9 o'clock on Fridays, and from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. on Saturdays. It sounds like a small thing, but it's huge, because again, domestic violence doesn't just happen between 8 and 5. It happens all the time, 24 hours. So we're really excited about that. And we're hoping that that will really allow us to be more effective in our reach to survivors. In addition to that, we're also setting up 7 satellite offices around the county. Prince George's County is the second largest jurisdiction in the state of Maryland. The northern, the southern, the east and western side of it. We are centrally located, but others are not. We're setting up 7 facilities, if you will, that will operate remotely back to our main office in Upper Marlboro. And they're going to be at the in police districts, in District 1, which is Hyattsville, District 7, which is Fort Washington, Bowie, the city of Bowie, as well as smaller jurisdictions closer to the Washington area. That would be Bladensburg, Cottage City, and Mount Rainier. And then lastly, which is most exciting to me, is we're going to be on Bowie State's campus. We're actually setting up a facility in Bowie State, because again, we know this is happening not just in homes of adults, it's happening amongst our teens. College age students are involved in these relationships, and then even helping Dominique to help teach them about the healthy relationships. We're going to do some work with fraternities and sororities, as well as the athletic teams, to really get them to see and recognize and understand what a healthy relationship is and is not. So I'm going to take some of your nuggets, Dominique, and we're going to use them. In fact, I'll have to get your book, both of you, to take along and to use that. So again, my role here today was really just to talk about resources and just to highlight and emphasize how important it is to reach out, get help. If you aren't able to do it, and probably you're not unless you've had the background and training, make the referral. Every state, every county has a resource. In fact, in Maryland, every county has at least one comprehensive domestic violence agency that can give you the resources, the help that you may need, whether it be shelter, counseling, even abuser intervention services are made available through those agencies. We do not provide any services for abusers. We are strictly advocacy-based for survivors, but the key is to get help. Don't stay. If you get hit, if you're abused once, it's more than likely going to happen again. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right. We as women, we are creatures of instinct. we should pay attention to those things. But unfortunately, we oftentimes tend to brush them off. We want to give them another chance. But the reality of it is that you're more than likely in a place of harm and danger. So I am going to end there. I don't believe there's anything else that I can share. I greatly appreciate the information that was provided by the two presenters and look forward to taking any questions that anyone may have.
Wow, thank you, Dr. McCain. Thank you so much. I'm so excited about the new hours, about the new districts. So it's a good time. It's a great time, unfortunately, for those that suffers, have to suffer through dealing with domestic violence. But I'm so glad that I'm a part of a organization, if you will, that we have advocates that are out there fighting for those who are in need of domestic violence. I'm not going to talk too much longer because we're running out of time, and I want to be able to ask questions and get answers for them. But to start off so if you have a question, if you would raise your hand and we'll pin you, and that way we can get through as many questions as possible. But I do want to start with one of the questions to you, Dr. McCain. I know in the presentations, we talked a lot about women being in domestic violence relationships, but can you also speak to that everything that we talked about today does not just impact women, but they are men, and more likely men that are being abused as well, and the resources for them that are available?
Absolutely. We know that, statistically 1 in 3, 1 in 4 men are actually in abusive relationships. In addition to seeing younger women as well as women of higher income, we are also finding that more men are coming forward, reaching out for help. The real issue with men who are victims is that there's the one element of shame and embarrassment. It's hard for a man to come forward and admit that he's being abused. The other challenge for men is shelters. Many shelters, while they may not necessarily have the space for men, they are required by law to provide the same accommodations to a man that they would to a woman. So that would sometimes mean putting them up in a hotel. But quite frankly, resources are not as plentiful for men as they are for women, because again, women are the predominant population of victims of domestic abuse. Certainly does not mean that men are not abused, because they are.
Okay. Thank you. Another question that we have: how do I help someone who's in a DV relationship? So if one of the Dominique or Faye, if one of you can answer that. The question is, how do I help someone who is in a DV relationship?
I would say,
Oh, go ahead.
be very careful how you help, because you could also put yourself in a compromising situation. I would say make sure that they are not around their abuser. You have to be very careful when you're talking with them, because the abusers are so controlling that they could actually be right there while you're giving them information. So make sure they're in a safe space when you're sharing information with them. And they need to go to the authorities.
Thank you, Faye. Dominique, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, my experience has often been that my friends weren't aware that they were in a DV relationship the same way I wasn't aware. So one, you could be helpful to them by naming it. So I don't sugarcoat when I'm talking to friends and they're in that situation. I'm very clear about what that behavior is, and naming it, using the proper terms to name it. But then I also follow up with making sure they understand that I'm not going anywhere, and that I understand why they may not be able to leave, why they may not be able to end that relationship, and that I'm going to be here while they're in this. Because oftentimes when people are in those kinds of relationships, they experience control from their family and friends who are aware of it, because they're like, well, you need to get out of it. And if they don't get out of it quickly enough, then they'll be isolated from by their family and friends. So I do those two things. I would add is just one, making sure they understand that's what this is,
Mhm.
not normalizing it in any way. Like, nope, that is, controlling, or that's, whatever the behavior is, like naming what that is. So that means, you yourself being familiar with those terms so that you can do that. And then being supportive, because they're used to, I don't want to say they're used to, but it's common for them to be abandoned by family and friends who are like, why don't you just get out? They don't understand,
Right.
why they're staying. So, and that they really need that more than anything. It's just people to be there
Mhm.
for them.
Okay.
I would also just add very quickly to not be judgmental. You don't understand the dynamics of what's going on, why they're there. You want to be supportive. You want to be there. Understand that they may not be ready to leave. Everyone that's in an abusive relationship cannot leave. So you need to be able to love and support them while they're there, help them, give them safety plans, give them resources, because that's really the most important thing you can do for them, is to let them know that you're going to be there for them. And then lastly, I would also add, don't badmouth their abuser as much as you want to. The
Mhm.
reality of it is that they still love that person. And while they may leave them, they're going to more than likely be back with them. We know research tells us it takes 7 times to leave before you really go. You've talked bad about that person. Now they're not going to come back to you because they already know how you feel about them. So that would be the last piece that I would add to that.
And that's a key piece, Dr. McCain, because what oftentimes we do as a friend or family member, we would like to give advice and about how we feel about the person. And we have to remember it's not about us. We strictly want to remove that person safely from the abusive relationship. Thank you. One of the questions I have is, where should I go for resources in my area? So for the gyms, we're national. So we're from Maryland, Northern Virginia, Baltimore to now in Las Vegas. So we are all across the United States. So where are the resources in those areas? If someone is in, let's say, Las Vegas, where could they go for resources?
I
Battered
would
women shelters.
refer to the national hotline,
Yeah.
which would make that has access to all services around the country. I have the number very quickly. It's 800-799-7233. So for anyone, anywhere, if you call the hotline, they will be able to connect you with a local provider.
And I think
And the
the
nice thing,
is 799 SAFE, I want to say, if
Mhm,
that's easier to remember.
mhm.
1-800-799-SAFE. I would say National Network to End Domestic Violence, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence.
Mhm.
You can pretty much Google, like what Dr. McCain was saying, there is something in every state. So they may just have to Google where they are.
Mhm.
And then of course, if they can reach out to you all, then they can get in touch with us. If, like if you aren't able to get them in the right direction.
and
with-
another thing about the hotline number is if you go onto the website, it's a very safe site. If you click off of it, there's no trace that you've been there.
That's right.
So
Mhm. That is true. Also, just a reminder, if you do have a question and you don't want to share or ask your question, we do have a email that you can send your email to. We'll get those answers for you, and it's safe, it's secure. No one would know that you asked the question. So just wanted you to be comfortable and feel free to do that. And that email is DV. Oh, okay, I thought they had it up. That email for LeGems is, okay, there it is. It's dvchairs@legems1955.org. So that is a confident email. So if you have any questions after our event today, feel free to send that email. Again, it's confidential, and we will get the answers back to you as soon as possible. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. How do you break the generation curse? Domestic violence.
Ooh, that's heavy. I think first you got to be aware that there is one. I think, like I said before, a lot of stuff that we see is normalized for us. A lot of what we understand to be normal relationship behaviors are there is a curse to break. But then two, I go back to boundaries for yourself. Understanding, like what it is and, what your healthy relationship should look like. And then you can break the curse by insisting on having those boundaries in place in your relationship. I know for me, I think I'm breaking the curse in my family. And what I've noticed is that with the women in my family, they're not used to having boundaries and they're not used to enforcing those boundaries. And I think that's something that's common among women and especially among Black women. We are not used to setting and enforcing boundaries for ourselves. So it's not a comfortable place to be in, to be the first person to do that in your family. And you'll notice like, oh, it's like I'm the one who's being mean because I'm saying no and I'm advocating for myself. But it takes that. If you're going to be the one to break the curse, you're going to be a little different than the rest of the people in your family. You're going to be stepping out there and doing things in a more healthy way, right? Just like if you're trying to eat healthier, everybody else is eating junk food, you're going to stand out in that way. So one, becoming aware of it, and two, doing the work on yourself first.
And I would say this is being very transparent, something I've never publicly said. And I love my biological father. I loved him. My parents were together during my childhood and growing up. When I left home at 23, my parents were still there. But my mother was a very submissive and is a very submissive woman, very loving, very nurturing, great mom. My dad was a great dad, but my father was not a good husband. My husband was a serial cheater. I love him. Somebody's going to get mad at me, one of my siblings, if they see this. So I learned to be submissive. And I think I was submissive to a flaw. My father didn't beat my mom, nothing like that. But he needed her because he was crippled. He walked with crutches. So he utilized that to keep my mom with him when she needed him. He needed her, but still he did his dirt. And I think that was subconsciously, that was a learned behavior that I'm aware of now. So, and even infidelity, serial infidelity is abuse of sorts. So you have to be careful and know what you're learning. Know, as Dominic said, know what is normal in your life really might not be normal, and you have to figure it out.
Yeah. And lastly, I was just going to add, I was going to touch on the learned behavior. It's a passive process. I don't think anyone ever consciously says, I'm going to teach my child to behave in this way. Children mimic behavior. If you act a certain way, if you handle conflict by cursing, screaming, yelling, hitting, guess what? Your children are going to do the same thing. So you want to model healthy behaviors and recognize that they're watching. So it starts at home, but again, not consciously. It's a very subconscious, passive process, modeling its learned behavior.
Can I just piggyback on what Dr. McCain said and just add one of the ways that you can end the cycle? This is something we really don't want to say, is by leaving the relationship. Like we hear all the time, one of the things that I think is the most normalized behavior in our community is to stay with your abuser for your kids, or to stay, for whatever your reason is. But to Dr. McCain's point, children are watching, they mimic. That's how we all learned to be in abusive relationships, because we saw that and we thought it was normal. We see it on TV, like we hear all these things and we hear very little about what it should look like instead. So we end up following what we've seen. And so one of the things, if you really want to break the curse in your family, is to become acquainted with what resources you have and actually in that relationship, because then at least your children are learning that when certain things happen, this relationship should end, right? So even if it's a marriage, if it's not a marriage, whatever it is, if it's a friendship, they need to see that when certain things happen, the relationship doesn't continue, right? Or I'm holding that person accountable in some way.
Yeah.
I'm not just allowing that to happen.
Yeah. I know we're out of time, but I just want to add this real quick. I think that is so powerful and important because, as I mentioned, I grew up in a home where I watched physical violence almost daily. I walked away, grew up, said, a man will never put his hands on me because I knew what that looked like. And I said, the first time it happens, I'm out. But guess what? It was the emotional abuse that I didn't pay attention to. And because my mother stayed, just as you said, because she stayed, she taught me that no matter how bad it is, no matter what you're going through, you stay in those situations. So again, it doesn't always have to manifest itself in the form of physical violence. It could still be the emotional, psychological, the financial. He controlled everything, all the money. So again, those things are equally important, and children watch and they are learning. So I'm going to stop because I know we're out of time.
I know, and I'm so this has been a great program event on domestic violence. I have additional questions. We'll get those answered for you and send them back to you. I want to thank my team, the committee, Jim Donadine, Jim Chillinan McMillan, Jim Connie, Jim Denise Mackey Smith, Jim Josie Jones, Jim Brittany Jones, Jim Kay Harvey, Jim Anita Hicks, Jim Ernestine Hawley, Jim Rosetta Perry, and Jim Shea Howard. Thank you so much. This has been a great event. I think we may have to do a part 2, is what I'm hearing and getting text messages about. To our panelists, thank you so very much for teaching us, sharing your stories with us, and giving us the information, the resources that we would need to go out and share with our communities as a whole, and even for ourselves. I hate to end it, but I know we're out of time. We've gone past time. Thank you for those who have stayed with us and gone past the time with us. And again, if you want to get in contact with any of the panelists, we have their contact information. We will share that with you as well. Panelists, whenever you want to come and hang out with the LeGems, we're national, so we're in Georgia. Please, by all means, give us a call. We'll be there for you. And again, thank you so much. Jim Connie, do you have something you would like to add?
I do, but I see that one of our panelists, Faye, has her hand raised as well, and I want to give her an opportunity for any last words.
Okay.
Yes, I just want to know if the panelists and all of you from LeGem could stay on for a little while after it ends.
Absolutely. I guess our tech team is here. If we need to switch hosts, that is fine. I do want to say thank you all for joining us. This has been a wonderful event. I'm going to echo the words of our National Vice President, Anita Hicks. Hats off to the domestic violence team coordinator, you, Shanae. You guys have knocked it out of the park. Thank you so much to our panelists. We are so appreciative that you will be receiving love offerings from us for your organizations or for you to use personally, however you wish. But please look for something very soon from us before the week is out. And I want to thank you again. We wish we could give you all we have, but we really appreciate everything that you have done. For those of you who are interested in seeing this again, we are on YouTube. This will be posted for all to see. You can run it back. You'll be able to see everything and recapture everything. So if you didn't take enough notes, feel free to rewind, if that's another term. And then lastly, thank you again for coming. We will see you again, and hopefully we will have another part 2 the next time we have Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Thank you again.
Thank you. Mhm.
Those of you who would like to stay after the recording, we'll end here and we'll stay on for as long as you like.